Your piece is pretty sharply worded. It does make me wonder whether or not you think passage is in jeopardy here.
Well, you know, it's a tough thing for Pelosi. She, as you know, opposed Trade Promotion Authority back when President Obama was in office. I actually helped President Obama get Trade Promotion Authority over the opposition of Pelosi and Reid at that particular time. So she's not very pro-trade to begin with. On the other hand, the argument for USMCA is very, very compelling. You know, 176,000 new jobs, $68 billion increase in gross domestic product. We've got 12 million jobs already related to our trading relationship with Canada and Mexico. So I think it's going to be pretty hard for her not to take it up, even though voting for a Trump trade deal, I gather, is a bitter pill for them.
She was on our air with our Jim Cramer the last couple of weeks. She said she hoped that she was on a path to yes regarding USMCA. She made some comments last week suggesting that even with the inquiry in the House, that she can continue to work with the White House on some legislation. Can the House Democrats not chew the gum and walk at the same time?
Well, I sure hope so. You know, right now they've got a pretty thin record of making something actually become law. The way you make a law, it has to pass the House, the Senate, and be signed by the president. You know, they've been marching through their whole array of left-wing proposals. Obviously, those are not going anywhere in this current divided government. If she wants it to be said that she did nothing over the next 2 years but try to impeach President Trump, that's a position we're happy to argue about. We think that we ought to be able to do more than just create controversy here.
Senator, good morning. Your critics would say that you've done as much as any modern legislator to extract political leverage from votes that were once routine. I mean, 8 years ago, you and the rest of the Republican leadership used debt ceiling legislation to advance your party's political goals. 3 years later, it nearly happened again. So why is this any different?
Well, look, during the Obama years, I made 3 major deals on taxes with Joe Biden, 3 very significant deals. So when you have divided government, you need to look for things you can agree on and do those. And I don't see much of that happening right now. So I know the House has been on this impeachment addiction since the day the president was sworn in, but I hope they can turn their attention to something else. And USMCA ought to be right at the top of the list. It's good for the American people.
Senator, just to dig into that a little bit more, I mean, all the oxygen in the room does seem to be going towards this impeachment inquiry right now. What does it do to Congress's ability to legislate, whether it is USMCA, whether it's safeguards concerning China, prescription drug reforms, or even getting actual funding for fiscal 2020 federal budget, which begins tomorrow?
Well, we did reach an agreement on a bipartisan basis, obviously, on how much the government's going to spend both this year and next. And I think we'll be able to honor that agreement. It's not been quite as smooth in the implementation as I'd hoped. We are working on getting prescription drug costs down. There are other issues that we can hopefully reach some agreement on. Again, if I were the Speaker, I wouldn't want to go into next year's election having it credibly said that all you did for the whole Congress was harass the president and try to remove him from office.
That said, Senator, what does happen in the Senate if the House does get through with this inquiry and decide that they are going to impeach President Trump?
Well, under the Senate rules, we're required to take it up if the House does go down that path, and we'll follow the Senate rules.
There had been some discussion about, people literally going back to the Constitution and arguing there is no mandatory act on behalf of the Senate. Looking back at an interview that you gave in March saying you'd have no choice but to have a Senate trial if the House passed an article or more. But you're saying that if they did, the Senate would move ahead.
Yeah, it's a Senate rule related to impeachment that would take 67 votes to change. So I would have no choice but to take it up. How long you're on it is a whole different matter, but I would have no choice but to take it up based on a Senate rule on impeachment.
Senator, I want to go back to trade for a moment. There's been this trade war going on with China in particular. You've talked about the importance of USMCA to jobs. Are you feeling comfortable with the way the president is pursuing this policy? with China and the American farmers' ability to buck up under that?
Well, I'd sure like for it to reach some resolution soon. It's been very tough on American agriculture, and as you know, my party is very deeply based in rural America and small-town America. So I hope the president can get a good outcome here. The Chinese have been stealing our intellectual property and not playing by the rules for a long time, so I admire what he's trying to do. But I hope we can get a conclusion to this sometime soon, because rural America really needs it. And rural America also needs this USMCA. I mean, this is a big deal for American agriculture to get this new and improved deal with the Canadians and the Mexicans as well.
Senator, I want to go back to the rules around impeachment, if this is something that actually does come up in the Senate, because there's been some speculation that you might seek to change those rules or have those practices changed. Just to confirm, you're saying you would not do that?
No, the Senate impeachment rules are very clear. The Senate would have to take up an impeachment resolution if it came over from the House.
Okay, and then there's also been reports from Washington Post that you were the person who urged the White House to release that call transcript between Trump and the Ukrainian president. Is that actually the case? And if so, do you feel like that was the right move?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding what you were saying. What did you say?
There was a report last week from the Washington Post that you were the person who urged the White House to release the transcript of the call between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. Was that actually the case? And if so, do you feel like that was the right move in hindsight?
Well, I did say on numerous occasions I had called the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense wondering what the hang-up was on going forward with the aid to Ukraine, which I've very much supported. And I was curious as to what the delay was, but at least it all ended well. Fortunately, the aid was released, and I think that was an important step for our Ukrainian friends.
Possible curbs on investment between the U.S. and China, that's been in focus, especially the last couple of days, focusing on the Treasury. But there has been an effort in the Senate to increase oversight of both Chinese and other foreign companies that list here in the U.S. Do you support such legislation? And I guess how does it speak in general to how lawmakers in the Senate are thinking about China in the future?
Well, we're worried about the Chinese and their involvement in this country in some respects, but the Treasury Department has made it clear they're not interested in delisting, if you will, Chinese companies from U.S. stock exchange or from doing business in the country. That could end up hurting us. And whatever tactics we use with regard to China need to not be ones that punish us.
If we get an actual trade deal between the U.S. and China, what would that do to all of the legislating around that country right now, including Chinese companies like Huawei?
Well, we're concerned about Huawei. There's no question about it. And there are national security concerns here that we have to balance with our commercial interests. We don't want, actually, obviously, to make it more difficult for American companies to do business in China and for Chinese companies actually to do business here. But these national security implications are important. Huawei was right in the crosshairs of what we're talking about here. That's a good example.
When it comes to your op-ed today, Leader, you talk about House Democrats picking fights, running out the clock, using delay tactics. But you yourself have talked about being a grim reaper for bad legislation on the House side, whether it's Medicare for all or other things.
Yeah.
Could you blame Pelosi if she came out and said, I'll be a grim reaper myself?
Well, what I'm talking about is things we can agree on. I mean, here, USMCA is an example of something we agree on. Look, I don't expect her to take up measures that we think are important all by ourselves, meaning the Republicans, nor will I be taking up this whole litany of left-wing proposals they've been passing in the House. That's not designed to make law. That's designed to take a position. And they've made it clear that today's Democratic Party is on the far left of virtually every issue. But we do have divided government. When the American people elect divided government, they're saying, why don't you look for things you can agree on and do those? USMCA is right at the front of that list of things that we ought to be able to reach an agreement on that are good for the American people, That's not the kind of thing, it seems to me, we ought to be slow walking or refusing to take up.
Well, the stock market would argue that infrastructure is not far behind, and we've had multiple years of hope that something like that could also be attained. Is that dead?
No, we're going to do a transportation bill maybe later this year. It probably won't be as bold as the president was talking about, because it would inevitably, if it were that bold, involve a whopping gasoline tax increase, which is very regressive, hits medium and low income people very hard. But we will do a transportation bill. It will be more along the size of a traditional every 4 or 5 year transportation bill.
Senator, I want to ask you about election security. You recently threw your weight behind more funding for election security, saying that there's been more than $600 million allocated to that since fiscal 2018. Is that enough? Is that the right pace of spending? Yeah. And how are you gauging, given all of the threats, particularly digital, that the United States faces, whether we are secure enough in our elections?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the 2016 election, when President Obama was in office, was not handled well at all, and we all know the ramifications of that. What people are refusing to talk about is how successful the 2018 election was. The Trump administration did a terrific job of pushing back in 2018. Where were all the stories about election interference? Basically non-existent. What I am in favor of, and have consistently been in favor of, is giving the states enough money to do the job. What I'm against, and what we're not going to pass in the Senate, is an effort to take responsibility away from the states, who under our Constitution are responsible for conducting elections. We want to provide assistance, and the $600 million, the additional $250 on top of the $380 million we did last year, will provide additional assistance for states. I've always been in favor of that, still in favor of it. That's what we're going to do.
Will there be oversight as well, though, at the federal level to make sure that that money is being spent in a way that truly does secure the elections? Or are you advocating just giving the states the money and expecting them to do the job to whatever standard they see fit?
Yeah, the Department of Homeland Security did a terrific job in 2018 of working with the states, and they know what they're doing. It was very impressive. By the way, we had a classified briefing for all senators by the administration on the 2018 election. And behind closed doors, there was bipartisan applause for the great job they did in 2018. And then our Democrat colleagues walked outside and told the press exactly the opposite. Look, 2018 was a big success story. I'm convinced we're ready for 2020. Any foreign country that messes with us is going to have a serious problem in return.
Finally, Leader McConnell, I know the focus today is your piece about the USMCA, but when the president is tweeting about attacking the whistleblower or suggesting that Adam Schiff should be arrested or tweeting about civil war, do you have any view of his rhetoric in the last, say, 48 hours?
Look, what I want to do is spend our time accomplishing things for the American people. USMCA, as Leader McCarthy and I pointed out in the Wall Street Journal today, is something we can agree on, something we ought to do. It makes a difference for the American people. The House wants to spend it, they've spent the last 3 years harassing this president, and I gather we're going to get another chapter of that with the impeachment episode. But we need to find other things that actually make a difference for the American people and try to accomplish as much as we can. That's what I want to do, and that's what we're in the process of trying to encourage the House to do by taking up USMCA.